I'm only like 3 episodes into the Fallout TV series, and having never played, I don't know. That's not true. I played some intro level of one of the Fallout games where you come out of the bunker and the whole town is deserted, which I feel like is probably the intro to any
Yeah, I
Fallout
was going to
game.
say that sounds like
So,
most.
but yeah, I am curious how this show is going to take a player insert video game in which you are nothing. The video game has no opinion of you because it's supposed to be whoever is playing the game coming out of the bunker and doing all of this stuff, versus here they need characters that you care about. So it's what's her face coming out, and like I don't know. I'll be curious to see how they balance it up, but reviews seem to be good so far.
Yeah, what I was impressed with is it takes a good show to get Isabel over the hump with some of the gore.
Oh, sure.
And I'd been holding off. I'd mentioned the show to her a couple of times. And for any listeners that don't know, Isabel is my wife. My wife. I just said this week, and I was like, why don't you give it a try? Let's watch one episode, and if you absolutely hate it. And
Sure.
we got through the first 2 episodes, and then tired crashed next day. She actually came to me and said, I really enjoyed that show.
Nice.
And did care about the characters, because when I said like who's your favorite character so far, she said Lucy. I love Lucy.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Lucy is like,
Yeah.
I think she's great. I think she's a great character. I'm on my third run. Like I'm on my third walkthrough of the entire season right now.
Oh, I didn't realize the whole thing had already aired.
Yeah, all eight episodes are out for season 1.
Gotcha.
So I binged. I'm actually on my 4th pass now, watching it with Isabel.
I'm surprised Amazon did that, because Amazon did Halo. The Halo series dropped weekly.
I can tell you, I wouldn't have watched the show. I wait to binge. So
Sure.
I was supremely happy to find out like the entire season is out, because I watched it all in one night, right?
Yeah, you probably fast forwarded through a bunch of it, didn't you?
I did, but that's why I'm on my 4th.
Yeah.
But
Oh
but
my
this
God.
this is why I'm on my 4th time through right now. Is I actually sat through a whole scene last night. I was like, man, I missed this entire scene the first 3 times.
Yeah.
And now I'm watching
Oh
it
my
with my
God,
wife,
man.
and I can't skip ahead.
Yeah.
I'm like, that makes much more sense now.
Right. You have everything that the creative writers and directors and actors wanted you to watch. They gave you a story. Whereas if you had asked the AI to write the story that you wanted to hear, then it would have fed you a 20-minute clip of nonsense, which is what you basically gave yourself.
That's a leap. No, there's no connection there. I will say this.
No.
I'm a better viewer than the non-skip tenors, because I'm on my 4th time through. I'm watching it in different layers. One, first pass through gets me hooked to where I'm thinking about it like, wow, cool. Now I got the video game. So job's done. They're marketing and they're growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second and third time through, I'm skipping 10, but I'm getting into the slower bits. 4th time through now with Isabel. I love the show. I'm sold. I'm hooked, right? I'm a better viewer than the person that just watches the season once.
No, this is the normalization of deviance. Your weird TV deviance.
I think it's just elevated thinking.
Yeah. Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the chat from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human elements. I could go on for an eternity about the people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of 2 better people to do that than Kevin and I.
And that's why we've started to have more guests on this show. If you have a topic that you'd like to come discuss or rant about, drop us a note and come be a third chair for an episode or 2. Also, a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app updated everything and it's now terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com or submit them on the Discord in the User Stories channel, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking to a coworker or something. On this week's show, we've got more Reddit questions that we'll take a shot at answering, going and trying to help some folks out.
Yeah, we got a lot of content to get through. It's going to be a
This
real
is definitely
juicy.
a two-part episode. This
Yeah.
is, yeah. And actually, it ended up being a three-part episode. Yes, some of that intro sounded familiar to you because I am just resplicing the original recording into 3 episodes because there was so much we went over. But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call User Stories, where we'll eventually hopefully be answering questions that you, the listeners, send in. But for now, I think we found some interesting questions on Quora and Reddit that we can tackle. Afraid Agency 3877 has to be one of those random generated usernames on Reddit, looking for some tips on how to work with their engineering manager. And there's a bunch of really fascinating comments in this question. I think everyone's a little bit at fault here, so I'm starting to get a sour relationship with the engineering manager on my project and want to repair it with her and set some expectations ASAP. They don't really give a ton of detail about just it doesn't seem to be working very well, and then later down in the thread, as they start to reply to people, they say some really interesting things. A couple things. I believe stress is being passed down from leadership because they are stressed about dollars spent. Our sprints are having carryover and it's not agile to track time on user stories or tickets. The devs are having carryover and not estimating features correctly, and overall it's the engineering manager that should make sure those are correct. We'll come back to a couple of points on that. The second comment. She has a perception of me as someone who cares about deadlines more than things working, which is not true. This person has messed up a lot as well by approving code that doesn't meet standards, and I'm getting pressure from management to be harder on the team because it's my project overall that I own. I imagine the engineering manager doesn't see value to my role because I'm not an engineer by trade and not a technical product manager, just, in quotes, a product manager. Whoo boy, where to start?
Well, I mean, they're just a product manager, so I can't really help them. I only deal with TPMs. I'm sorry.
There
I'm
you
sorry,
go.
Afraid Agency. I'm of course I'm kidding. It's a tough. Yeah, this is a tough one because you know what I'm gonna say. Humans are involved, right? So there's
Yeah.
egos, and there's pressure, and there's stress, and let me see. I'm gonna check my memory bank.
I want to pull it apart. So, the first comment, leadership has put pressure on them because dollars spent and sprints are having carryover. I think we might have a situation where leadership fundamentally doesn't understand. They've decided to go agile, but aren't actually working agile. They're expecting dates and they're expecting, are there legitimate reasons for sprint carryover? Are there illegitimate reasons for sprint carryover is a tricky concept. There's plenty of valid reasons that the business and the stakeholders might not think is legitimate. So you have some fundamental, it sounds like, misalignment from top down. The next one, it's not agile to track time on user stories or tickets. Incorrect. Like, actually, it's really helpful, and I think this is one of the arguments in Kanban's favor, but I think Scrum even has ways of doing this in burn down charts and a bunch of things that Scrum Masters would probably be able to bring in and help you understand. It's super valuable to track the time that's going on. The goal of that time tracking is not to yell at the person and say, oh, you're over due date, you're, bad at your job, although there might be some skill development to happen if you notice one engineer constantly misestimating and not delivering quality on time, or not on time, but quality near the original estimate. But you absolutely should understand the time it takes to work on tickets and make sure that you're working on the skill development of effort estimation and breaking down stories. You as the product person might not be breaking down your stories to a granular enough level that you can deliver them and you can estimate them reliably. One of the key parts of a user story is it is estimable. And if it is too big, if the story is just, I don't know, extra large, then it's a bad user story and you need to do better. But that fundamentally sounds like who told you that Agile doesn't have time, the ability to track the time on user stories?
Yeah, but I've heard that argument. I've had a better experience with time logged on stories and subtasks, so I've never fully subscribed. I'd say most of the time I see this in medium companies where there is this fascination for management and external from the engineering team to say how long is this? What's the scope in time? And then there's the engineers sometimes will be a little bit more religious about, well, no, it's measured in complexity. Like I don't have to provide a time. It's like that's not right. Like
Right.
it's yes, there's complexity, but I still need scope, and then I still want to know. I still want to time track. So yeah, I'm kind of with you on that.
If you're in a sprint, then you've agreed that this user story will fit in the sprint.
Yeah.
And so either the user story is poorly defined and needs to be broken down, or if you're in sprints, then it doesn't work that way. Even if you're in Kanban boards, you're not, maybe I don't know. I've never loved the idea. I hated being in companies where I had timesheets and I had to report that I did 4 hours of X and 2 hours of Y. That sucks. If that's what they're looking for on tickets, I would also push back on that a little bit. But you do know that's why Kanban is really nice. Sprints, I think you can do this in Scrum to a degree too, which is I picked the ticket up on Tuesday and then I moved it into the done column on the Kanban board the following Wednesday. It has a lifetime of 8 days. Like I don't need to know that you spent 6 hours on Tuesday and only 4 hours on Wednesday. That's a level of micromanagement that I'd be curious why you need to do, unless it's maybe client billable. But there are things that you can do that can get you a better understanding. Again, not with the goal of yelling at somebody, oh, you told me it would be done by Tuesday and you didn't give it to me until Thursday. That's being a bad manager. That's not understanding what you need to do. But there are benefits to saying, hey, during sprint planning, we all agreed we thought this was going to be less than a sprint. Let's evaluate why that didn't happen. Were there blockers? Was it we need to work with you on your ability to get these database queries running, and we need to work on that skill set for you. Your estimation skills need to get better. There are personal developer improvements that you can make that make this better in the long term, but the goal should not be individual micromanagements of the tasks themselves. That should be evaluated in aggregate and saw as like a learning opportunity. I don't know. It's weird.
So let's focus on the carryover. Here's an interesting one that I've seen for years and years now is I'm sitting with the engineers and we're scoping and someone throws a 15-pointer in there, right? And so I get a couple of points on this topic. That's always piqued my attention. One, I want to know, why are you viewing them? Where's the complexity, right? Because I've often been at companies where James is telling me it's a 2-pointer and Michelle is telling me it's 15 points. And I'm like, all right, do we understand what product's asking for? Do we understand this user story, right? Or am I dealing with somebody who doesn't understand the architecture and so they're seeing extra complexity, or the design, they get the product asked, but the design, they're going to do something in the database where I'd say, no, that doesn't belong in the database. Why would you do that?
Or the other direction, is Michelle the only one who noticed? No one's thinking about the weird thing that's going to happen on step 3. James is looking at it going, oh yeah, that's really easy, and hasn't actually done the right analysis. It goes in all directions.
It does. It's
a helpful conversation.
Dynamic. It's a great conversation. So now we agree that it is actually 15 points.
You need to go back to product.
Yeah. So how do we go back to product? This is what I would want for our listeners. And I'm kind of interested too in the answer to this one, because what happens when I bite off more than I can chew for a sprint and I can't deliver anything to the customer because the user story is too big for the sprint? So what are engineers doing then?
So in theory, you should know that answer during grooming, and grooming should be an independent ceremony from the sprint. So you can do grooming whenever you want. So if the grooming happens on Monday, but the next sprint doesn't start, those two things have always puzzled me. It feels like a lot of teams get stuck in this, like, well, the sprint starts next Monday, and so we're going to do grooming on like the Thursday beforehand. And I'm like, why?
Yeah,
why can't you do this grooming like 2 weeks beforehand? Give yourself time to have those conversations. So yeah, I would say part of it's that ceremony. You are also going to run into this in sprint planning or even later during the sprint. And I think that's where a good, healthy relationship with product is also important, to be able to go back and say, ooh, nope, something's going wrong here. We need to reevaluate this story. And you should be open to, again, go read the original manifesto. I don't disagree with this part of the manifesto. Be open to the requirement changing. Be open to going back and pointing out to product. Both sides need to be open to the idea that you're going to get engineering feedback why it's more complex than they originally thought. Product might come in and say, oh man, now that I'm actually looking at what this is, we are realizing we missed this requirement. Both sides should be open to that changing and have the conversation. Maybe the third plank of this entire podcast is just talk to people.
Yeah, always. So let's say we all agree it's a month of work. We have to do it. Here's where it gets interesting. I've seen it done many, many different ways. There's a tendency for the engineering team then to break that down into consumable stories. And here's where the stories start to change, right? Which is like, now my stories become this what I'm used to the subtask being, where it's like, oh well, I wanna put 9 points in this sprint because I want to get them finished. I'm not going to be delivering anything that product can necessarily be using after that first sprint. And then we're going to put the rest of my stories in the second sprint so that I avoid the carryover.
Which tells me you don't understand Scrum fundamentally, because you should be identifying the value of the sprint. And if you're not delivering value at the end of the sprint, then why are you on a 2-week sprint? What are you doing in this? And that's fine. There are absolutely weird use cases where everyone needs to come together and we need to write the really important fundamental piece. And until we have the fundamental piece, we can't do the thing on top of it. I get that. But the value in that is to convey that we laid the right foundation, and we can show you why, now that we've laid that foundation, the next step is just plugging in the pieces. There's a valid argument to that, but if you can't figure out how to break it down so that that foundation is done within the sprint, or this is where I just get hung up on, why is it a 2-week sprint then?
Yeah.
Why are you all stuck to this? Why can't you just randomly say this sprint? This is why Kanban makes so much more sense to me.
Yeah, we talked about this previously, and I sort of used the example. The point I was making previously on this was I actually think a lot of technology teams suffer from a lack of skill around design. Where hey,
Right.
I want to design this in such a way that I can show progress in the sprint. Here's the value of the sprint, and I think the challenge too. There's a mental challenge for engineering teams that they don't look at it like that. Hey, if I'm providing the foundation to them, it's like, well, no, it's not valuable until the UX is there. It's like, well, actually, we can pump data in now, and we can actually start doing some of the performance tests on we could do performance tests and unit testing on what you've built. Now
Right.
you got the second sprint to finish off the user interface design or the whatever.
Right.
I think some humans have a hard time with that. Again, I'm just blaming humans for that.
No, but I mean, that is also, there's a little bit of product partnership and product manager skill set to say, okay, how am I going to evaluate? What are my acceptance criteria for this user story that is just the foundation? What is the thing that I'm going to see as a result of this to say, yeah, you're on the right track? Is it you opening up a Jupyter notebook and running some stuff and showing me that now the schema is correctly ingesting the data, even though there's no UI to show? Like, how am I going to partner with engineering to get to see that value? And the goal of that is not to be like a micromanager and be like, prove to me that you did the whatever. The goal is to say, if you as a product person can't help the engineering team justify the value of the sprint and the value of the story, then why are you working on it? Why are you doing it? So you should be able to trace back and say, oh, you're going to show me that now that the tables are all set up and the APIs are calling, now I know that I'm going to get I don't know. It requires a slightly more technical product manager sometimes, though.
But you're also robbing yourself of a winning culture. That to me is super important. You're sort of
Right.
telling engineering teams like, oh, we can celebrate in 6 weeks when this is done. It's like, actually, you can celebrate 3 times in that 6 weeks. You can
Right.
celebrate the foundation and the fact that you just unblocked your performance engineers and some of your QA guys who understand the data. The second sprint you can unblock again because you're at another milestone. You're getting green lights from products, so you know you're on the right track. And to me, there's a difference. One is like a stressful culture of like, we don't feel like we're delivering anything. We don't feel like we're delivering that value. And it's like, you're just missing the opportunity to revel in the milestones.
Right.
Which is a much better culture.
I think it's probably because I've done this more in startups than in larger organizations, but I often challenge the engineers to say, okay, I get that you want to write the entire foundation correctly, but is there a way that we can think about this where we write the first 40% of the foundation, we get all of the tables set up, but we don't have the code to populate 2/3 of them. And then we have the plumbing for something ready to go. Like, think about it as an MVP. And is there a way that you can prove out the value of, okay, we know we want to build the giant piece of plumbing that is going to connect to any of our clients' APIs. Okay, pick one client API and show that at the end of the second sprint, we're connecting to the client API. It doesn't show up in the UI yet. It doesn't populate the data yet, but you can show the wins of the incrementalism. And I think that's another thing that people tend to lose sight of in Scrum and Agile, which is you are supposed to focus on the value and the increment and getting to that point. And that means breaking apart your monolithic thought process. I have to do all of the foundation. I then have to do all of the API layer. I then have to do all of the UI. No, figure out where you're going to see the value and identify the wins along the way. We're repeating the same things now. I think we're on the same page, but
I did want to call out this one reply, and the response is super sarcastic, so I'm not picking on the user. I love it.
Yeah.
But it's important to be upfront and establish dominance early. Let her know that her team is slacking and could be doing more. Imply that you could do her job and might even ask leadership to give it to you if she doesn't get her butt in gear. I love this because it's quite obviously a joke. Everybody took it as a joke, except I've actually worked with somebody like this. And he's a really good friend of mine. And I remember he stopped me on the way into a meeting one time. He works for me, so I was able to deal with it. But he said, it's okay, don't worry. We're going to get this team to do what we want because I'm going to go in this room and I'm going to blaze on the weakest guys in the room. And once everybody sees that and they see that I am technically and intellectually superior to them, they're going to to do exactly what you want. And it was
Madness.
at that moment I realized he was a monster, and I'd
Right.
probably been sponsoring that monster for like a good 2 years, and hadn't
Right.
realized, like, oh my gosh, look what I
Yeah.
unleashed on these poor engineers.
No.
A phenomenal architect, but a terrible
Sure,
human
but I
being.
mean, it's that weird alpha bro mentality of like I have to assert that dominance. And by the way, the scientist who did that very limited study on wolves in captivity now regrets ever publishing the article talking about alphas. There is no such thing. That's not how it works in the wild. That's not a thing. There's a reason why that guy who was the dog trainer, Cesar whatever, is now disgraced, because it turns out that's not the best way to train dogs. Dogs don't respond to an alpha. That's all nonsense. They respond to the violence. They're terrified of you. That's not an alpha thing. That's you being a dick. So like it's not a real thing. People should stop doing that.
I'm so alpha that I choose to be a beta.
Sure,
That's
yeah.
how alpha I am. Like, I could be an alpha day to day, but I'm like, nah, I'll be a beta.
Yep, definitely.
So anyway, I thought it was funny. So do not do that.
No,
Do not do that.
I think we've gone on such a tangent. I think there's other comments from this afraid agency user like, buddy, you are in the wrong. Like, she has a perception of me as someone who cares about deadlines more than things working, which is not true. Very next sentence. This person has messed up a lot, and I'm getting pressure from management to be harder on the team. So both can't be true. You don't get to have pressure and apply that leadership pressure to the team and then claim you're also not the person trying to impose deadlines. It's not a healthy relationship. That's not how products should work with engineering. And this, I think, goes back to maybe one of our early agile conversations where product owners become this monster who is the representative of the business and trying to just like dictate everything that the engineering team does and feels like the engineering taskmaster. Nope, it's a partnership. You should all be in this together. And if you find yourself in that situation, you also have bad leadership. The leadership at this company is clearly terrible and is not fostering anything helpful. Again, I feel like this is not a question we're actually helping anybody on. This is just us illustrating things for others not to do. There's no answer for afraid agencies. Stop being bad. Stop having bad leadership. I don't know.
No, it's absolutely true, because we're not there day to day. We never know. We're just getting a highlight, right, of somebody's
Right.
take on it. And yeah, it's very hard to help on some of these things without being there day to day and be like, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what's going on. Oh, it's like, well, you
Right.
said this. Could you have said this?
Right.
So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yep. An anonymous burner account. I love that they were like, I can't possibly attach my name to this question. So an anonymous burner account on Reddit.
That's the name of the account?
No, the name of the account is one of those random generated accounts,
Yeah.
but they say in the body that they didn't want to use their normal Reddit account. So the question is it normal for developers to be loaned across product areas? And they go into detail about recently my team lead has been asked to loan developers from my team to another product area's work because that team doesn't have their own experts in this area and their developers are skilled in what they need to get done. And so it's going to totally throw off this person's roadmap and possibly even the budget, depending on what the duration of the impact. Now, all of a sudden, this other team gets to start using those engineers. And so there's weird, how they do timesheets and tracking. Like it gets really messy for this person, apparently. I've been in situations like this. I think I've definitely been in situations where that subject matter expertise is limited. And so that person is the only person who's been around long enough to know how weird subsystem A works anymore. And so even though their features that they primarily work on don't work on subsystem A, when the person who's got a bug with it, when something else comes up, that person sometimes gets yanked off. It's not great. I don't know that I have a good answer here. I just thought it was a fascinating scenario that people run into and just wanted the discussion.
Yeah, I've experienced this. I've experienced this a few times. One of the and again, it's a little bit cultural, right? Like the roadmap, sure, but all of that comes into play. I think where I experienced it and it actually worked without it was a positive experience all around. Was we had two domains. One was much more of a innovations, next generation domain, and they were looking at the platform and architecture and really sort of discounting the fact that there were other domains that already carried that expertise. And so, rightly so, they had an aggressive roadmap. They wanted to build something that would have encroached on one of the other domains. And so at the time, the roadmaps didn't align, right? It was a much more burning issue for the innovations team. So we ended up putting the work in the right domain and then we loaned out engineers for a couple of reasons. One, because the innovations domain weren't clear on how the current implementation had been done,
Sure.
but we also wanted to supercharge the delivery, and so we upped the resource capacity on the team on the domain that was going to build it, and that was a good experience all around because it was just culturally a good experience too. Because quite often the innovations team is viewed as the golden children, right? Like, oh, they work on a different timeline than us. They're working on newer tech. They're the engineers of the future, and we're working on legacy. And so it started to tear some of the cultural boundaries down too. So I've had a good success. I think the challenge is really part of a PMO challenge too, is making sure you can look at the resources across those teams, right, and understand. Seems like this person, anonymous burner, is saying that that's going to totally throw my roadmap off. So it'd be interesting. Is this person a product guy or
Yeah, I believe so.
yeah, so that's a challenge then, and I would think hopefully
Yep.
the bug doesn't stop with the product the product owner, right? Like hopefully it's something that as engineers are being moved around, there's a greater understanding up the org chart. But
I mean, this is where I think you run into issues where if a team is in its own silo and there isn't cross product awareness, there isn't cross business awareness of, okay, Steve's roadmap is XYZ and Mary's roadmap is ABC, and the two, all of those product people aren't talking to one another, the business doesn't understand the relationships between those things, then yeah, if it's operating functionally, then Mary getting B prioritized higher than Steve's X, and therefore the two people need to come off of Steve's team and go work on Mary's feature, that makes sense. But if the organization isn't designed to have that understanding, then yeah, this person's kind of screwed and should be raising the flag of like, this is a gap that we need to address at a higher level. I'll also say there's a weird detail in here about like, okay, so the engineer gets pulled onto Mary's team and now works on that, but still bills to Steve's accounting code. And like there's weird things also happening where I'm like, cool, Mary gets the benefit of the engineer, but now it's using Mary's billing code. There's some weird, like, this feels like a very specific problem, and like I don't know that I've got any generic advice for somebody to just go and raise the red flag of like, yeah, no, it can't work that way. If you're going to make these changes, then you need to commit to the concept of the change, and the change needs to impact all parts of the business, billing, timesheets, all of that kind of stuff. That's a weird one. This guy sounds like he's kind of screwed.
yeah, I think the other challenge with this one is they've been asked by who? And that's the
Right.
problem with, like, in companies where there's 30,000 of you or even 10,000 of you, there's many kings and queens, right? So depending on
Right.
who you've been asked, it might work in your division, but
Right.
they're being loaned across to a different division, and yeah, now the budget questions and budgets across across the verticals in some big companies, that's a challenge. So the who is very important in this question. Who's asking them to provide developers for the extra
Right.
work?
All right. So in summary, apologies to this anonymous burner account. You're kind of fucked.
Yes, you are
Yeah.
truly fucked. I will say this: does it offer the opportunity to loan extra engineers to get the roadmap back on track? Because if you're working in that kind of flexibility, you got to assume if I loan you 2 developers and my roadmap's off, then I can borrow 3 to get my roadmap back on. So
Well, and that's the thing, is the way this is described is it sounds like the loan is happening because certain people are experts and need to go help some other team. If that other team doesn't have any experts that can come help you, then
yeah,
I don't know what you're gonna do. Yeah, what's the tit for tat in that
so
situation?
you're still fucked, basically.
Yeah, a little bit. Pretty boring with 3 R's, boring on Reddit.
I was gonna say, I just wanted you to say it that way. Pretty boring.
Boring. In the weekly product management rant thread, how the F do I break into product management? I've been trying to get into product management for 4 to 5 years at this point. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a good one. I like this one. I pulled this one out, I think, because at points in my career, I've often wondered about making that switch over to more product-esque career, right? Like not
Sure.
necessarily a product manager or a product owner, like, but I've often thought about being in the product organization. And yeah, I don't really know how I break in. I always feel like, oh, you don't have enough business or knowledge of the customers, depending on the sector I'm in. But yeah, Kevin, tell people how do they become product managers?
It depends. So I think there are a lot of jobs. So It depends on the company and it depends on the size of. There's so many factors in this. So there are types of product managers who are very market focused. They are very focused on the business problem. They're going and talking with prospects and clients and they're understanding the revenue numbers that they want to hit. They're focused on how do they set the goals and the KPIs and how do they measure it. It depends on the type of company. If you're B2C versus B2B, if you're in a B2C world, you're going to spend the next 2 years at Amazon trying to get a single button click to go from 5% to 7%, and you're going to test 100 different methods to try and find ways to do that. Product manager is a very weird, broad job title. So you have to ask yourself, what about it looks interesting to you? Why do you want to be in product management? Do you want to have an influence on the backlog, on the roadmap? Do you want to be working with the engineering teams? Do you want to be closer to a product owner definition in some companies? Sometimes that's still called a product manager. Do you want to be doing all of that market analysis, competitive analysis? Do you love going to all of the trade shows and watching other competitors' webinars and going and talking to prospects and trying to hunt around in, the conversation to find competitive insight and understanding what you should be doing for them? Do you like that synthesization process of understanding, I heard from 5 different clients, what's the feature that's going to be built that meets all of their needs, or just not, we're not going to meet 2 of the clients' needs because they're the only 2 in the market asking for it. Like, it's a really interesting thing. There's so many flavors of product manager. So you first need to understand, what do you want? Why does this seem like the career that you want to get into, and what do you want to do? And from there, it also depends on the type of companies you're going to go after, the type of hiring managers you're going to encounter. So if you encounter me as a hiring manager, I'll look at a person who had market analyst, business analyst, sales engineer. There's a ton of job titles that have applicable skills. That person who can listen to requirements, can hear what a client is saying, can ask why and why and why. Why are you doing this? They can dig into what's going on, and they want to solve those problems. Then, the job title might not matter. Or you should go and get some certifications. You should go take the pragmatic certification. You should go and do some different look for. I'm the last person to ask about types of product certifications, but if there's certifications out there that companies are looking for as part of the hiring, that's possibly a thing to do. I don't know. It really depends on the type of job you want, and go and maybe find another feeder job into it. Yeah, a QA person, an analyst, a scrum master. There's a bunch of roles that you can prove you've built up. The bullet points on the resume can sometimes slightly matter more than the job title that you're coming from, and you can go and write a good cover letter, go and try to find opportunities internally at a larger organization that you can move up through. I genuinely, I don't know how to answer it because it's such a broad job title and there's so many paths forward, and it really depends on what you want to do. I'll also say I've been having a conversation with someone at the place we work at now, trying to figure out if they want to move from data science into a more product-y role. And I do think that there's a really fascinating path for people in that technical product manager role. How do you're solving the business problem, you're trying to understand it. You don't want to go to the client conferences, you don't want to hear every single prospect meeting, you don't want to become a salesperson lightweight, but you do want to, help solve the problem, help work with the teams and convey requirements, build up the correct vision, build up the correct overarching market requirement. There's an interesting technical product management route for people, but I did caution this person. I was like, that is the exception, not the rule. I have not seen that the number of job titles you're going to encounter in a job search for product manager is much higher. Product owner, all of these titles is much higher than you're going to find technical product manager. And so you also have to be mindful of what's your career options after this. What are what career path are you setting yourself up for? I've been very fortunate to run into situations where people appreciated the technical product manager skill sets that I bring to the table. I don't know that I would recommend that to people as a guaranteed career path forward. That feels like you're going to be narrowing your possible jobs in the future. And it's a path to go down if you have the confidence that you're going to find companies that you can be at for several many years. You think it's going to build up skill sets. I don't know. I have a hard time answering this question for people because my experience has been fairly narrow, and I don't know that I would recommend my path for very many other people. And I feel bad about that because it's a super fun job and it's super valuable. I wish the industry would change, and I don't know how to help the industry change. Everyone should value what a technical product manager could bring to their organization, and they don't always.
That's valuable in lowercase for our listeners, just so you know.
What did I say that was not capital V?
No, just
I don't know. What are you trying to say?
Not all product guys are created equally, right?
Yep.
I will say this, you brought up an interesting point, and I did just recently work with somebody on this. Ladies and gentlemen, etc., when you work at your resume and you put bullets and you say, streamline this process, it's good to precede that or at the end explain what the benefit was, which was like,
Yeah.
We built 30% faster, or we made $20 million, or we produced 15 more widgets a day because of this enhancement that I brought to the team. And I think I've seen that where there's, even with my own resume, because I've got so many jobs through word of mouth, there's
Right.
my resume is just this thing that comes along with me.
Right.
But when I look at it, I don't really ever sort of call out we did this and what that lead to. We were able to re-architect and re-platform, or move the entire airline workflow and application to the cloud so that we could rebuild a data center. And in doing so, allowed elasticity in the architecture, and those companies experienced X amount of performance and
Right.
revenue gains. And I think that's what people really miss when they're selling themselves, is you sort of talk about all the cool things you did, but tell me why, that's what's going to jump out at me, is what did you do to that environment? What was the result of that? Because we all, like, no one's going to go in there and be like, I joined and I actually introduced this really long process and everybody hated me, right? Like,
Right.
you're telling me the good thing you introduced, but tell me what it resulted in. Like, everybody clapped. Even that's good. Everybody
Right.
clapped and I dropped the mic and walked out.
Well, and there's a weird thing that's happened where not most, a ton of HR systems now use these applicant tracking systems that will scan the resume and will read the resume through AI. And you now need to have a statistic on every bullet point and an action verb on every bullet point, or you won't even make it to the hiring manager. But the counterpoint to that is you get stuck with, even in your example, streamline the process and blah, blah, blah was the end result. Still a bad bullet point. Streamline the process by facilitating requirements gathering sessions, by soliciting stakeholder feedback, by collaborating with the engineering team. Like, I don't want streamlined. Streamlined is the buzzword you use to pass the ATS system. Tell me what streamlined meant. How did you streamline, and the results of the streamlining? So I need a pretty beefy bullet point, which is unfortunate, but you need to figure out how to convey the action. It's kind of like when you interview and you should use the STAR method: the situation, the task, the action, and the result. Your bullet point should basically be the STAR method. Explain to me the things you did. So many bullet points I read in product manager resumes don't help me understand how they did the thing. And if you can't convey to me what your thought process was of how you accomplished this thing, I have no way of knowing that you streamlined it. Did you, or did your engineering team streamline it? What about you participating in that helped in the streamlining of that capability? You got to give me the actions.
Yeah, I got to update my resume. I'm updating it as we speak right now.
There was a service I used a couple of years ago because it was during the pandemic and I didn't have the word of mouth that I usually have to get a job. And so I started using, what was the name of it's a website where you could basically upload your resume and it'll run it through the ATS AI and give you the suggestions of, like, this bullet point is not sufficient. It's really helpful.
ACS AI. Let me add that to my notes.
TS with a T.
What is it?
ATS, Applicant Tracking
ATS.
System. ATS.
ATS AI. Oh, I love that. Okay. Much better usernames, by the way, in the enterprise architecture thread. No-neighborhood-1389 asks, hi, I have around 5 years experience as an implementation consultant. I have also worked as a trainer and instructional designer. What steps can I take to transition to a career as an enterprise architect? School, cert, question mark. So if you do go the certification route, there are a couple of certifications. I didn't list them all, but I sort of listed it. Two that are away, they're sort of widely away from each other. One is you can go the professional certifications route, right? So you want to be a cloud enterprise architect and really focus on AWS or Azure or Google, then there's plenty of learning tracks in the cloud. I think they call them like paths or pathways, right? So you can start off with a solutions architect, basic cloud concepts, and then they start to fan out. So you may go the data route and start to look at data architecture certifications, or it could be more NetOps focused. And I guess it's good because in a way I'd like to explain the way I view enterprise architecture, and always have, is a little bit like the Cub Scouts or the what do you guys call them? Eagle Scouts of America. You get these
Sure.
little badges, right, that suggest you have experience and passed the test. And
Sure.
and the more general enterprise architect might be all the way from NetOps and understand security concepts, compliance and governance. Very rare that you'll get somebody who understands legal as well, but application and software architecture, some cloud architecture experience. So it really depends on how broad you want to go or how narrow your focus can be, because you could just, being a data architect or a big data architect today, a phenomenal profession, right? So you're going to get a lot of experience, but your focus is really going to be around data practices.
Is that the type of job? So like there are types of product owners, types of product managers, types of project managers where depending on the scale and the requirements, somebody who just has the certification actually is an okay sort of entry level. You could come in as an associate and possibly work your way up. Is enterprise architecture one of those, or do you need to have some other relevant background skill?
I've never seen anybody enter enterprise architecture at the entry level.
Okay.
I've seen junior to mid-level engineers move over to enterprise architecture and learn on the job with the understanding that you have a lot of material to cover. But again, it depends on your culture, right? Like, do you want it to be narrow focused? Is your idea that, hey, you're a great engineer, I think you'd be a great software architect, and I really want you to
Right.
focus on the application side of things, which would be like recipes and performance.
But did you hire them as an engineer and then see how good they were and internally hire them to enterprise architecture, or did you externally have them come in as an engineer?
Yeah, so that's the sneaky thing. It
Right.
depends.
Okay.
If you go to a company where the top-down buy-in is there and there's investment in enterprise architecture, and I've worked in places like that where it's like, here's your budget, and you start to look and say, okay, I can milk 12 architects out of this. But actually, 4 of those guys that you're bringing in are not necessarily enterprise architects, right? They probably are narrow focused. They might be data engineers with enough experience that you could argue that they're a year away from training to becoming a big data architect, right? So there's just
Sure.
some gaps in there. So yeah, so the enterprise architecture teams that I built when I've had budget it's a lot easier. I generally like to have at least if I had 12 enterprise architects, then at very least 3 of them are general enterprise architects, and then there's 2
Okay.
that I would say that it's not a big leap for them. But I could have a NetOps architect on there, right, who just specializes in, and it gets super crazy, like these professions, right, working in the data center to the cloud. So you got that hybrid. They're no joke. Those network architects, they're no joke. They're taking settings on routers and load balancers and all of that kind of cool stuff. And in the hybrid world, that's difficult to do. So you could have some really focused people on the team, and that's tend to how I look at it. Is I like to have a ratio at least 25 to 30% of the team I can throw anywhere, and chances are those general architects are going to understand. Yep, I'm going to need my NetOps guy to come in here. I'm going to need a data architect. I'm going to stay on this project. When you beg, borrow, and steal in an enterprise architecture team, then you're looking, I'm always looking at the psychology, but I'm starting to look stronger at the psychology of someone and saying they think in terms of patterns. They're able to abstract and they think in terms of abstract ideas. Now
Sure.
it's going to take me 2 years to get them to a point where they're comfortable, useful. I can put them in an enterprise situation in front of 4 solutions architects or domain architects, and the way they think about problems is going to get them by for a long time. So it really depends on how much investment and how much freedom you have.
So if you have a hiring manager looking for product managers like me, who can look at the bullet points of the sales engineer, the bullet points of the market analyst, the bullet points of the business analyst, the bullet points of the product owner, and realize that they have that pattern matching skill, that capability that I'm looking for, even though the job title doesn't match up, you can hope you can luck into that kind of role. What is the job title pattern? What are the job titles that might have the right bullet points that you would look at and say, oh, they could be an enterprise architect? Is it DevOps? Is it sales engineer? Is it solution architect? What are the job titles that you would look past to look at the bullet points instead?
Yeah, I'd be looking. A lot of people throw architect on there, and that's usually then a good opportunity because you fairly early in the conversation you can start to figure out like what they consider to be the architecture in their experience. I would say solution architect, that's one. Technical architect is another, because a technical architect could be somebody who wants to transition and say, well, I've really been embedded in a domain or across domains for 10 years now as a technical architect, but I've done solution. I've been boarded with solution architect, and I really want to skip the solution architect role and actually go more general architecture, because like it's often too like I've noticed with my career, a lot of my focus has been internal, right? It's how all the plumbing works, like the electricity and the plumbing and the building, and there's enough fire stairwells for everybody to get out of this building. So, and I'm not thinking about the people that are coming into that building day to day, like the parking lot and, you know, like the area of the city that this building is built in, which has robbed me. Like, that's almost why I worry, like, as a product manager, I'm like, I always feel funny, like I don't know enough about the sector, right? So probably the last couple of years I've been more conscious about learning about the business, sitting with folk like yourselves and saying, I don't get this, explain it to me like I'm 5, right? Because I need to understand more about the business. So yeah, there's things in there. There's also just like methods and practices, right? You'll start to see people, and I'm not going to necessarily come up with the best examples off the top of my head, but if someone was to start talking about, I built a file server in S3 that served the entire company. Now I'm thinking, not only, okay, cool, you built like a Dropbox for your enterprise, but you had to go roll that out across 15 domains. So how did you build the documentation? How were you able to be in 15 places at once? Oh, okay, you didn't roll this out to all 15 domains. It was just staggered. So what, did you go to each of those domains? Like, how did you roadmap that rollout? And I tell people that all the time. And I've done it with dev teams where they'll turn something on in the cloud and they'll say, we love this. Can we have it? And my challenge has always been, it's great. Take it to the enterprise. Like, that's the challenge now. How are you going to get 100 other engineers to use this? Because if you don't, they're all going to come up with their own thing. And that's the difference, right? Is you just built something for you and your team. Now I have to try take that to the rest of the teams, and now I have to bargain with them, but it's not their requirements. You guys didn't bother talking to anybody else about those requirements for what this thing should do.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for in a resume, is when they say, I got something that transcended my own domain and went broad.
Okay. Interesting.
TOGAF is another certification. I actually like TOGAF. I think if you're going somewhere and you don't have a framework in mind, you can always pick a framework. You're not going to have 100% of the framework anyway, right? Ever.
Sure.
So you can start off with some of the TOGAF concepts, get yourself the architecture review board, start to identify the key stakeholders. And again, it's cultural, right? Or the type of company you go to. Quite often, I like enterprise architects to be pretty broad, like, which means there's probably security architects, network operations guys or network architects, some cloud architects. And I like to build an enterprise architecture that has all those flavors of architecture. Quite often you go into big companies and it's siloed. Actually, those people they're not just in different teams, they report into different orgs, right? And so there's complexity. You can still build a community around those people. So quite often you beg, borrowing, and stealing internal people, rallying them to that enterprise architecture mindset.
Any other feedback for No Neighborhood 1389?
No, it's the first thing you got to do is you got to go find a company, because enterprise architecture is one of those weird careers that goes up and down. There's interest, then there's not. So you got to find a company. It's actually, we're on an uptick right now for enterprise architecture, and I think that's because remember we talk about this, like the old days we used to have like 3. We'd have a database tech and a business logic layer, and I could build a UI on top of it, and cool, I'm good. It's not like that anymore, and I think we're starting to see enterprise architecture come back because companies are beginning to realize how much money they lose on poorly designed architecture. So find a company that's looking for, that is telling you why they want an enterprise architecture. And then from there, you can start to recognize, like, this is my skill set. I'm a software architect, or I'm a security architect, but I have some network operations experience, and I'd like to branch into that type of architecture too.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. If you liked what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember the name of the podcast is Jordan Jesse Go. Also tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there grow by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. To read articles we've written on similar topics to the ones we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at AcceptancePod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog over there. We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptance criteria and on Discord. You can find links to both in the show notes and on the blog. And I promise we'll be moderating the crap out of them to keep it a nice little slice of the internet. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at kthomaseuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER. And this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.